The silence where Earth used to be was a special kind of blasphemy, a resonant quiet that hummed with the memory of 1,000,000,000,000 murdered voices. Ilara had grown up hearing that silence in the redacted histories and the sanitized hymns of the Stellar Mandate. But to be here, in the sole exclusion zone, was to feel it pressing against the hull of her small surveyor ship, the Stray Thought. She cut the main drive, letting the vessel drift on inertia alone, a speck of rust and ambition in the shadow of a god's tomb. Before her, the third planet was no longer a world of blue and white, but a perfect, crystalline sphere, a monument to its own sin called the Sanctification. The Mandate had not merely glassed Earth, they had transmuted its crust into a flawless, glittering shell 2 centuries ago, sealing away the heresy of humanity's chaotic origins beneath a mile of diamond-hard lattice. It was beautiful, a star-catching jewel that spun in the void, and the sight of it made Ilara's stomach clench with a rage so profound it felt like grief. She was a disgraced archivist, a chaser of ghosts, a woman who had traded a comfortable life of state-approved truth for the cold, hard vacuum of forbidden questions. Her obsession was a myth, a story whispered in the data havens of the galactic fringe, the echo. It wasn't a signal in the traditional sense, no radio waves or neutrino bursts, but a quantum resonance, a supposed pre-mandate artifact that pulsed from the heart of the Sol system, a heartbeat in the corpse of humanity's cradle. The Mandate denied its existence on, of course, just as they denied that humanity had ever known true freedom, true art, or true gods before their doctrine of cosmic unity brought peace through erasure. Ilara had spent 10 years and every credit she had to her name building the resonance sensor that now dominated the cramped cockpit of the Stray Thought. It was a web of crystalline conduits and repurposed focusing lenses that hummed with a low thrum, sifting through the background noise of the universe for a vibration that wasn't supposed to be there. Her former colleagues at the Imperial Archives on Cygnus X1 had called her a heretic for even suggesting that a pre-mandate signal could survive the sanctification. They had stripped her of her credentials, branding her a purveyor of divergent thought, a crime just shy of sedition. But Ilara knew truth wasn't something that could be erased, only buried, and she was very, very good at digging. A soft chime echoed through the cockpit. The central conduit in the sensor array began to glow, a faint, pulsing light the color of a winter dawn. Resonance lock, the ship's computer stated, its voice calm and devoid of the manic excitement that seized Ilara's own heart. Isolating frequency, standing by. She leaned forward, her breath fogging the cold plasteel of the main view screen. For years, the signal had been a flicker, a ghost in the machine. But now, inside the exclusion zone, it was a steady, rhythmic pulse. It wasn't a message, it was a key waiting for a lock. Her hands trembled as she calibrated the broadcast emitter, aligning the ship's systems with the resonance frequency. The legend said the echo was a distress call, the last gasp of a dying world. Others claimed it was a curse. Ilara believed it was a breadcrumb, the first clue to finding the Libris Primordia, the mythical last library of old Earth, an unredacted archive of human history. Sending the signal back, amplifying it, was the only way. Broadcast, she whispered, her voice hoarse. The Stray Thought shuddered as the emitter fired a tightly focused beam of resonant energy directly at the crystalline surface of sanctified Earth. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence deepened, pressing in, and and a cold dread washed over her. It was all for nothing. A fool's errand. The stories were just stories. Then, reality broke. It didn't tear or shatter. It fractured like flawed glass. A web of hairline cracks spreading across the void in front of her. The crystalline sphere of Earth did not react, but the space around it did. A point of darkness, absolute and total, bloomed 100,000 kilometers off her bow. A hole punched through the fabric of the universe. It was not black. It was the absence of color, of light, of information. From this wound in space-time, colors Ilara had no name for began to bleed out, shimmering waves of iridescent wrongness that made her head ache and her teeth itch. The ship's chronometer began to flash erratically, time itself becoming unstable, stretching and compressing like taffy. Alarms shrieked through the cockpit as gravitational forces that had no right to exist seized her tiny vessel. The stray thought was a leaf in a hurricane, tossed and spun as the anomaly grew, the darkness at its center dilating like an immense pupil. And then, from the depths of that impossible rift, they came. The first ship was a blade of geometric heresy, all sharp angles and brutalist design, forged from a metal so dark it seemed to devour the starlight around it. It was vast, larger than a Mandate capital ship, but it moved with an unnatural silence, devoid of the engine glow or energy signatures that defined modern vessels. Its hull was scarred, pitted, and covered in a strange crystalline frost that flaked away into the void, a residue of its long journey. Another followed, then a third, and a fourth. A fleet of phantoms emerging from a forgotten age. They were nothing like the sleek, luminous, teardrop-shaped vessels of the stellar Mandate. These ships were fortresses, hammers, instruments of wrath built for a grimmer, more desperate time. Their forms were archaic, alien to the modern eye, with exposed spines, jagged weapon emplacements, and engines that looked more like furnaces than drives. As the last of the 9 ships slid free of the temporal rift, the wound in space healed itself, snapping shut with a final, silent shudder that sent a ripple through the system. The silence that returned was different now, no longer empty, but filled with a terrible, waiting presence. Ilara's ship was caught fast, held in a tractor field that was as cold and unyielding as the void itself. She was being reeled in, a minnow caught by a leviathan, drawn towards the largest of the phantom ships, a behemoth whose flat, armored prow resembled a tombstone. The name was painted on its hull in faded, archaic lettering, a language she only knew from forbidden texts: Absolution. The docking bay of the Absolution was a cavern of cold steel and shadows, vast enough to hold a dozen ships the size of the Stray Thought. As her vessel settled onto the deck with a metallic clang, the air hissed into the bay, tasting of ozone and sterilized, ancient air. The ship's ramp lowered, and Ilara stepped out, her hand resting on the grip of a plasma pistol she knew would be useless. She was not greeted by a boarding party or armed soldiers, but by a single figure that coalesced from the shadows near the far wall. It was tall, impossibly slender, its form composed of shifting, semi-solid light held within a chrome steel armature that hinted at a humanoid shape. It had no face, only a smooth, polished surface that reflected her own terrified expression. "You broadcasted the key," it said, its voice a chorus of synthesized tones, ancient and patient. "The chronoclasm is unsealed. The protocol is engaged." Ilara found her voice. shaky and small in the immense space. Who are you? What is this place? The being of light and steel took a step forward, its movements unnervingly smooth. I am the warden of this vessel. This is the Absolution, flagship of the Terran Echo Fleet. We are the consequence of a war you have been taught to forget. Terran, the old name for human. Echo Fleet. It was all real. The myths, the whispers, they were all terrifyingly real. You've been hiding, she asked, her archivist's curiosity momentarily eclipsing her fear. Not hiding, the warden corrected. Waiting. Adrift. As our world burned, our final command was not to fight and die, but to endure. We were shunted into a temporal pocket, a chronoclasm, where time flowed at a fraction of a percent of the universal standard. We were to wait for the recall signal. The key. You have brought us home. Home. Alara looked past the warden, through the shimmering energy field of the docking bay, at the crystalline sphere that was once their home. There's nothing left, she whispered. The Stellark Mandate. They sanctified it. They erased everything. The light within the warden's armature seemed to dim, to cool. Erasure is a temporary state. History is a patient predator. The Mandate's doctrine of unity is a lie built upon a foundation of ash. Our protocol is not to mourn. It is rectification. Before Ilara could ask what that meant, a new alarm blared, this one from her own ship's console, its signal relayed to the bay's speakers. A proximity alert. A vessel had just warped into the system. Ilara's blood ran cold. The Mandate. They must have detected the energy released from the chronoclasm on the Absolution's main view screen, which flickered to life on the far wall. A new ship appeared. It was the epitome of Mandate design, a luminous Word-class Justicar cruiser, its hull a flawless, glowing white, shaped like a holy writ, radiating an aura of serene and absolute authority. It positioned itself between the Echo Fleet and sanctified Earth, a guardian at the gates of a desecrated temple. A powerful, condescending voice echoed through the docking bay as the Justicar hailed them on an open channel. Unidentified vessels, you have violated the Soul Exclusion Zone, a holy space of penance. Your forms are heretical, an affront to the cosmic unity. Identify yourselves and prepare to be boarded for purification. Your existence is a crime. Confess it, and the Mandate may yet show you mercy. The warden stood motionless for a long moment. Ilara held her breath, expecting a reply, a negotiation, a threat. The warden did not speak. Instead, it raised a slender arm, and the Absolution's external broadcast system came to life. It sent not a message, but a single, unredacted data packet, a torrent of raw information aimed directly at the Justicar ship. Ilara's own console decoded a fragment of it, and she saw what it was: historical archives, visual and audio logs from the final days of Earth. It was footage of these very ships, the Echo Fleet, defending the planet against an orbital bombardment from ships bearing the nascent sigil of the Stellark Mandate. It was the truth, weaponized. Aboard the luminous Word, the Justicar captain's face, visible on the view screen, contorted with rage. Blasphemy! You dare broadcast such divergent falsehoods in this sacred place. You will be purged for this. He turned to his crew. Fire a purification beam. A warning. Show these relics the light of the Mandate. The Justicar ship's prow glowed as a lance of pure. White-hot energy formed at its tip. This was the power that had sanctified worlds, a beam that could melt continents. It fired. A silent spear of annihilation crossing the void. Ilara flinched, bracing for an impact that would tear the Absolution apart. But the Warden did not raise shields or take evasive action. Instead, a barely visible shimmer emanated from the Absolution's hull, a localized field of distortion that enveloped the incoming beam. The lance of energy, a weapon of impossible power, seemed to slow, its brilliant white light shifting down the spectrum to yellow, then orange, then a dull, angry red. It aged, decaying across millennia in less than a second, its coherent energy dissolving into a harmless spray of radiation that washed over the Absolution's hull like a gentle rain. The Justicar ship was left momentarily exposed, its primary weapon discharged and recharging, its crew staring in stunned disbelief. Ilara looked from the fading radiation to the Warden, whose faceless head was tilted as if listening to a distant song. She finally understood. They hadn't been waiting. They had been sharpening the ports along the dark hulls of the Echo Fleet. Ports that had been sealed for 2 centuries began to slide open, and from within the shadows of each one, a cold, ancient light began to glow, promising not purification, but a long overdue and terrible reckoning. She hadn't found a library. She had unleashed an apocalypse. The light that bloomed from the Echo Fleet was not the clean, sterile white of mandate weaponry. It was a fractured, prismatic chaos, the color of dying stars and forgotten nebulae. It wasn't a beam or projectile in any sense Ilara could comprehend. It was a wave of pure information, a targeted burst of ontological decay. From the prow of the Absolution, a ripple in space expanded, not with explosive force, but with the chilling certainty of a mathematical proof. It washed over the luminous word, and for an instant, the Justicar cruiser seemed to resist, its pristine white hull shimmering as its own reality-stabilizing fields fought against the impossible. But it was like trying to cup water in a sieve. The Justicar ship began to glitch. First, the light from its hull flickered, its proud insignia of the unified cosmos momentarily replaced by the sigil of a forgotten pre-mandate corporation, then by a pattern of tribal markings from a world long since sanctified, then by nothing at all. The ship's form wavered, its elegant lines blurring, stretching, collapsing in on themselves as its own history was forcibly rewritten in real time. The voice of its captain screamed over the open channel, but his words devolved into static, then into a dead language, then into a series of pained, atonal clicks that had never been uttered by a human throat. The ship was not being destroyed, it was being unmade. Its past, present, and future were being simultaneously deleted from the timeline. With a final, silent shudder, the luminous word dissolved into a cascade of shimmering, crystalline dust, each mote a paradox, a tiny fragment of a thing that had never existed. The dust hung in the void for a moment, a ghostly afterimage, before sublimating into nothingness, leaving behind only a faint, lingering scent of ozone and the deep, profound wrongness of a hole in the universe where something ought to have been. Ilara fell back into her pilot's chair, her mind reeling, trying to process the sheer heresy of what she had just witnessed. She was an archivist. Her life was dedicated to the principle that what has happened cannot be unhappened. But she had just seen a weapon that treated causality as a correctable error. What? What was that? She breathed, the words catching in her throat. The warden turned its faceless head towards her, the light within its armature swirling like a captured storm. That was a rectification. The vessel designated luminous word was an instrument of historical erasure. We have returned its function upon itself. It no longer is. It no longer was. The finality in its synthesized voice was more terrifying than any war cry. This wasn't warfare, it was cosmic editing. The warden gestured toward the main view screen, which now displayed a complex, flowing schematic of the Echo Fleet. Our weapons do not operate on the principles of energy and matter alone. They are conceptual. We fire argument, not ammunition. The universe, at its most fundamental level, is a narrative. The stellar mandate has spent centuries imposing a single, false chapter upon it. We are the original manuscript. Ilara's mind raced, connecting the dots of a history she had only ever glimpsed in forbidden fragments. The technology, the temporal displacement, the ontological weapons, it all pointed to a level of scientific understanding that was mythological. Project Enoch, she whispered, the name of a deeply classified pre-mandate initiative she had once stumbled upon before the data slate nearly melted in her hands. The hybridization of consciousness and space-time. They called it a failure, an abomination. The warden's form seemed to straighten, a gesture that might have been pride. It was not a failure, it was an ascension. The last free scientists of Earth saw that the mandate's ideology was a mimetic plague, a disease of thought that could not be fought with mere ships and guns. So they built a cure. Each vessel in this fleet is a living argument. The absolution is the argument of consequence. The siren's lament. There. It indicated a sleek, blade-like ship. Is the argument of grief. The forge of ages is the argument of resilience. We are not crude. Archivist. We are inhabited. Each of us is a gestalt consciousness, a fusion of thousands of minds who chose to become a single, eternal idea rather than submit to the mandate's unity. Ilara stared at the ships, no longer seeing them as machines, but as sentient concepts, weapons forged from the very soul of a murdered civilization. She had not merely opened a tomb, she had awakened a pantheon of vengeful gods. The view screen flickered again, displaying a cascade of encrypted data streams intercepted from across the galaxy. It was the mandate's reaction. A Justisar cruiser, a symbol of immutable power, had vanished from the heart of the Sol system. The initial reports were a chaotic mess of disbelief and panic. Sensor logs were flagged as corrupted. Witnesses were quarantined for psychological contamination. But the truth was a virus, and it was spreading. Within minutes, the official doctrine was established. The event in the Sol system was classified as a level Omega divergent anomaly, a hostile mimetic outbreak. The Echo Fleet were not soldiers. They were a disease of reality itself, and the only response was total, systemic purgation. A new title flashed across the screen under a portrait of a stern, robed figure, the High Justixar himself. A fleet was being mobilized, the fleet of sacred annihilation, reserved for extinguishing threats deemed existentially heretical. They are afraid, Ilara murmured, watching the frantic military orders scroll by. They have never seen anything like you. The warden made a soft chiming sound, the closest it had come to expressing emotion. They have. They saw us once before. As they set fire to our world, They have simply forced themselves to forget. Forgetting is the cornerstone of their faith, a faith we must now shatter. It turned its full attention back to Ilara. You are an archivist. Ilara, your purpose is to preserve truth. That is why you were able to resonate with the key. You did not seek power or revenge. You sought knowledge. That is a rare and valuable thing in this galaxy of lies. I was just chasing a story, she said weakly. I didn't want any of this. And yet, you are now part of the story's telling. The warden replied, The rectification protocol has an initial target, a place you know well, the mandate's primary information control nexus, the nerve center of their campaign of erasure, a listening post and archive called the Silentium, located in high orbit over Cygnus X1. Ilara felt a jolt, as if the deck plates had been electrified. Cygnus X1, the system she had been exiled from. The Silentium was the very institution that had branded her a heretic. The place where untruths were manufactured and distributed as gospel across the spiral arm. It was a fortress of lies, guarded by a fleet of mandate wardens, ships designed to pacify and control civilian populations through overwhelming sensory and psychological warfare. The wardens are not justicars, Ilara warned, her voice regaining some of its scholarly authority. Their weapons don't destroy matter, they dominate minds. They broadcast fields of absolute certainty, psychic frequencies that enforce obedience, that make crews turn on each other, that make you believe the mandate's truth is the only truth. We are aware, the warden said, its tone unwavering. One cannot fight a lie with a better lie. One fights it with a truth so absolute it burns the lie away. And that, archivist, is where you are essential. You know their systems. You know their archives, their firewalls, their methodologies of suppression. We do not wish to destroy the Silentium. We wish to liberate it, to turn it from a weapon of erasure into a beacon of remembrance. The offer hung in the cold, recycled air of the Dockin Bay. She could be a prisoner, a terrified witness to a cosmic war she had accidentally started, or she could be what she was always meant to be, the keeper of the story. The rage that had simmered inside her for years, the quiet fury of a scholar forced to watch history be mutilated, finally boiled over. Her fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now overshadowed by a grim, righteous purpose. This was the ultimate archival project, the restoration of everything. What do you need me to do? She asked, her voice steady now, firm. The light in the warden's core pulsed, a warm, approving glow. You will be our scribe, our witness. While our arguments unmake their fleets, you will direct our consciousness into their data streams. You will guide us through the labyrinths of their lies to find the core truths they have buried. You will help us remind the galaxy of what it has lost. The engines of the absolution began to thrum, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated not through the hull, but through Ilara's very bones. The other 8 ships of the Echo Fleet moved into a flawless, silent formation around their flagship. She walked to the edge of the docking bay's energy field, looking out at the crystalline sphere of sanctified Earth one last time. It was a beautiful prison, a perfect lie. The fleet was turning away from it now. Their mission not here in the graveyard of their birth, but out in the living galaxy, where the disease of forgetting still held sway. A new set of coordinates glowed on the main view screen, Cygnus X1, as the Absolution prepared to engage its temporal drive, tearing another brief, controlled wound in the fabric of space-time. Alara felt a profound sense of destiny settle over her. She was no longer a disgraced archivist. She was the first librarian of the rectification, and the library was about to get very, very loud. The journey to Cygnus X1 was not a journey through space, but through a wound in time. The Absolution's temporal drive did not cross distances, it folded them, pulling the destination toward the origin through a corridor of non-reality. For Illyri, strapped into a specially designed crash couch in the ship's Spartan bridge, it was a profoundly disorienting experience. The viewport showed not the star-strewn void, but a flowing, chaotic river of moments. She saw nebulae being born and dying in the same instant, saw worlds flicker from primordial fire to frozen dust, saw echoes of battles fought in timelines that never were. The Gestalt consciousness of the fleet bled into the periphery of her own mind. She felt a phantom memory of a child's laughter on a sun-drenched beach that no longer existed, tasted the metallic tang of fear from a soldier in a trench on a forgotten moon, heard the quiet hum of a laboratory where scientists were making the impossible choice to dissolve their identities into a machine. These were the ghosts that inhabited the Echo Fleet, the thousands of souls who had become the argument, and their collected experience washed over her, not as a coherent story, but as a symphony of loss and resolve. The warden stood beside her, a silent column of light and steel, its presence a grounding force in the temporal storm. "They are remembering through you," it explained, its chorus of voices cutting through the psychic noise. "You are an open book in a library of locked vaults. They feel your curiosity, your empathy. It resonates with them." The journey ended as abruptly as it began. The river of time resolved back into the familiar, static image of space. But this was a space unlike any she had seen before them. The Cygnus X1 system was a masterpiece of cosmic violence and mandate control. The system's heart was the black hole itself, a perfect sphere of absolute darkness, its accretion disk a swirling, incandescent whirlpool of stolen starlight, casting the entire sector in a perpetual, ethereal twilight. And in geostationary orbit above this maw of oblivion hung the Silentium. It was less a space station and more a piece of celestial jewelry, a vast, intricate lattice of crystalline spires and glowing data conduits that pulsed with a soft, internal light. It was beautiful, serene, and utterly menacing, a library built to look like a cathedral, radiating an aura of unshakable authority. Patrolling this temple of lies was the Warden fleet. There were 6 of them, not large, but perfectly formed. Their hulls were flawless mirrors, reflecting the distorted light of the accretion disk, their shapes shifting and featureless. Alara knew their design philosophy. They were built to be psychic mirrors, reflecting a target's own doubts and insecurities back at them, amplified 1,000-fold until their will collapsed. They carried no visible weapons, for their primary armament was certainty itself. On the bridge of the Silentium, High Sensor Kale watched the Echo Fleet resolve into existence on his main tactical display. He was a thin, ascetic man, his face a mask of placid conviction. He felt no fear, only a profound sense of offense, as if a beautifully curated gallery had been invaded by a mud-spattered beast. Heresy given form, he murmured to his adjutant. Their very existence is a logical fallacy, a contradiction to the unified verse. They do not need to be fought. They need to be corrected. He raised a hand, his fingers tracing a command on the holographic interface before him. Engage the purity field. Full broadcast. Let them be reminded of their own error. The 6 mirrored ships of the Warden fleet moved into a perfect hexagonal formation around the Silentium. Their hulls began to glow with a pure, silver light, and then they broadcast. It was not a sound, not an energy beam, but a wave of pure, conceptual pressure that washed through the system. Alara felt it hit the absolution like a physical blow. It was the feeling of absolute, irrefutable truth, a psychic weight that pressed down on her soul. A voice, calm and infinitely reasonable, bloomed in her mind. A voice that was not a voice, but the very structure of logic itself. You are an anomaly. Your thoughts are divergent, chaotic, impure. Unity is peace. Uniqueness is suffering. Your history is a fiction, a fever dream of a flawed species. Let go of this painful illusion. Cease to be, and find harmony in the one true narrative. She felt her own convictions begin to dissolve, the memories of her past, her quest, her rage, all seeming childish and foolish in the face of this overwhelming certainty. Her hand twitched, reaching for the emergency release on her harness. The thought of simply opening an airlock and embracing the perfect silence of the void suddenly seeming like a blissful release. But then, another force pushed back. A chorus of voices, not one, but thousands, rose from the depths of the Absolution's consciousness. They were not calm or logical. They were a cacophony of defiance. I remember my daughter's face. One ghost whispered in her mind, "That is my truth." I remember the taste of injustice. Another growled, "That is my truth." I remember the feeling of creating a poem no one else had ever written. A third sang, "That is my truth." The Warden's synthesized voice cut through the chaos, clear and strong. They offer a single note and call it a symphony. We will answer with the music of a collapsed civilization. The Echo fleet responded. From the hull of each ship, a different kind of wave was emitted. It was not a wave of certainty, but a broadcast of pure, unredacted humanity. The siren's lament broadcast grief, a tsunami of loss so profound it cracked the mirrored hulls of the nearest Warden ship. The forge of ages broadcast stubborn, irrational hope, the feeling of building something new in the face of annihilation. A conceptual force that caused the mandate's logic field to flicker and warp. The absolution itself broadcast the cold, hard logic of consequence, a relentless stream of causality that demonstrated the mandate's peace was built on a mountain of skulls. The two conceptual forces met in the void between the fleets, and reality itself began to fray at the seams. The space around the ships shimmered, filled with phantom images, burning cities, weeping mothers, defiant soldiers, all the messy, painful, beautiful truths the mandate had tried to erase. High Censor Kyle watched, his placid expression finally cracking. His purity field, the ultimate expression of mandate doctrine, was being drowned out by a tidal wave of historical noise. His ships were not being damaged, but their purpose was being eroded. The mirrored hulls began to show images not of the enemy, but of the truths they were broadcasting, the faces of the people their predecessors had unified. "This is not possible," he whispered. "Truth is singular. It cannot be a multitude. Now, archivist." The Warden's voice commanded Alara. "Their defense is engaged. Their mind is open. Show us the heart of their library. Alara's fingers flew across her console. The interface of the stray thought now seamlessly integrated with the absolution systems. She was no longer just a pilot. She was a nerve ending for the Gestalt consciousness. Her mind dove into the Silentium's data streams, not as a hacker breaking through a firewall, but as a ghost walking through walls. She saw the archives, vast and endless, a library of lies stacked upon lies. But she knew how archivists thought. She knew the most dangerous truths are never deleted, merely mislabeled, buried under layers of metadata, hidden in plain sight. They are proud of their work, she transmitted to the warden. Their greatest acts of erasure are cataloged as foundational unifications. I'm cross-referencing the Cygnus X1 sector's unification with pre-mandate population records. Her mind sifted through petabytes of data in seconds, the fleet's consciousness acting as a colossal search engine. She found it. A single, heavily encrypted data node labeled the harmonic convergence of Cygnus X1. The official story was that the system's human population, a group of unruly artists and philosophers, had willingly embraced the mandate, laying down their arms and singing hymns of unity as the Justicars arrived. The truth, buried in the node's core encryption, was a single, grainy video file from a forgotten security drone. It showed not a convergence, but a slaughter. The people of Cygnus X1 had not sung. They had fought. They had used sonic weapons, instruments of music turned into instruments of war, against the Mandate ships. And the Mandate had responded not with hymns, but with an atmospheric neurotoxin that had silenced every man, woman, and child, leaving their beautiful colony worlds perfectly intact but utterly devoid of life. I have it, Ilara broadcast, her voice shaking with fury. The truth of this system's birth. Give it to us, the warden commanded. Ilara rerouted the file. The entire Echo fleet received the data packet in the same instant. Then, they stopped broadcasting the general chaos of human experience and focused their conceptual weapons into a single, piercing point. They broadcast the truth of the harmonic convergence, not the story, not the data, but the feeling of it, the defiant music, the smell of the neurotoxin, the final, choked silence of a million murdered artists. This truth, specific and undeniable, lanced through the Mandate's purity field and struck the Warden fleet like a physical object. The mirrored ships, designed to reflect lies, had no defense against a truth so absolute and so personal to their location. One of the Warden ships simply went dark, its systems failing as its core programming was presented with a paradox it could not resolve. Another's hull cracked, not from damage, but as if weeping, venting streams of coolant gas like tears. Aboard the Silentium, alarms blared. Sensor Kale stared in horror as the video file played on his own tactical screen, an undeletable ghost in his perfect machine. His temple had been defiled. The foundational lie upon which his authority was built was being screamed across the system for all to hear. His life's work, the careful curation of a peaceful, sanitized history, was being undone. A cold, fanatic light entered his eyes. If truth could not be contained, then it must be burned away, along with the vessel that contained it. The archive is compromised, he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. The heresy is too deep. There can be no record of this failure, no memory of this. Impurity. He turned to his adjutant. his face a stone mask. Initiate protocol. Memento mori. Scour the record. Scour it all. The adjutant's eyes widened in terror. But, High Censor, that will mean... It will mean the silence is finally made perfect. Kyle interrupted. From the central spire of the Silentium, a wave of black energy began to pulse outwards, not an attack, but a terrifying retraction. The light from the station's conduits began to dim, sucked back towards the core. The crystalline structure groaned, its beautiful form beginning to decay, not into dust, but into pure, undifferentiated information, a wave of anti-memory that threatened to wipe the slate clean, taking the Echo Fleet, the archives, and the truth itself with it into absolute oblivion. The wave of anti-memory that pulsed from the Silentium was a sight of profound and terrifying beauty. It was not an explosion of energy, but an implosion of meaning. Where it passed, information ceased to be. The complex quantum states of matter and energy were not destroyed, but simplified, reduced to their most basic, primordial form. The intricate structure of a nearby asteroid resolved into a cloud of uniform dust. The stray light from the accretion disk was ironed out, its chaotic spectrum collapsing into a single, monotonous wavelength. It was the ultimate act of censorship, a weapon that did not kill its target but edited it out of existence, leaving behind a perfectly blank page. Ilara felt its touch at the edge of her consciousness, a cold, numbing void that threatened to unravel her very sense of self. Memories began to fray at the edges. The color of her mother's eyes, the title of her first forbidden history book, the name of the street she grew up on, they all became fuzzy, indistinct, threatening to dissolve into the encroaching silence. The Gestalt consciousness of the Echo Fleet recoiled, its thousands of constituent minds crying out as their own phantom memories were targeted for erasure. This was the mandate's final, desperate argument if history could not be controlled. Then history itself would be unwritten. Aboard the Silentium, High Censor Kyle stood with his arms outstretched as if embracing a divine revelation. The data conduits around him were turning black, the light of knowledge being extinguished. His adjutants screamed as their own identities began to flake away, their faces losing definition, their voices becoming a meaningless drone. But Kale smiled, a beatific expression on his face. He was not destroying an archive. He was achieving a state of perfect, unassailable purity. "There is no truth," he whispered as the anti-memory wave washed over him. "Only the silence." The warden's synthesized voice cut through the psychic static on the Absolution's bridge, its usual calm replaced by a tone of urgent, cold fury. Protocol Memento Mori, a conceptual failsafe. It unmakes the record, turning the archive into a localized informational black hole. Everything within its event horizon will be rendered null. We cannot outrun it. We cannot shield against it. An argument of erasure cannot be refuted. It can only be endured. Endured how? Ilara shouted, gripping her console as a wave of vertigo washed over her, the memory of how to operate the controls momentarily vanishing before snapping back into place. We must anchor ourselves to a truth stronger than their silence, the warden stated. A truth that is not a memory, but a living, breathing artifact. Archivist, the Libris Primordia you were searching for. You believed it was a place, a hidden library. You were wrong. The warden turned its faceless head, and the central view screen changed. It no longer showed the tactical situation, but a complex bioschematic, a swirling double helix of light. The Libris Primordia is not a collection of data slates. It is a genome, the unredacted human genome, a perfect copy of humanity as it existed before the mandate's genetic purges and behavioral modifications. It is the story of our chaos, our adaptability, our flaws, and our infinite potential, written in the language of life itself. The mandate fears it more than any ship, more than any weapon, for it is a blueprint for the very heresy they seek to extinguish. "Where is it?" Ilara asked, her heart pounding. "It is not in a vault," the warden revealed. "It is in a person, a single individual, placed in cryogenic stasis moments before the fall of Earth, hidden away on a vessel designed to look like insignificant debris, a vessel that has been orbiting the sanctified sphere for 2 centuries, waiting for the echo to awaken a guardian." The warden's arm lifted, pointing not at the silentium, but back towards the distant, glittering jewel of sanctified Earth. The key you broadcasted did not just open the chronoclasm, it awakened the sleeper. A new set of coordinates flashed on Ilara's screen. A single, tiny object, previously dismissed as a stray ice chunk in a high, eccentric orbit around Earth. It was broadcasting a simple, repeating signal, a coded sequence that was not a message, but a biological imperative, a heartbeat. The anti-memory wave is expanding. The warden's voice was grim. Its expansion is fueled by the very information it consumes. The Silentium's archives were vast. The wave will reach the Sol system in less than an hour. We have one chance. We must retrieve the sleeper and use the Libris as an anchor. The story of what we are, encoded in flesh and blood, is the only truth that can withstand the story of what we are not. The temporal drive of the Absolution engaged with a bone-jarring shudder. The fleet did not retreat. It performed a tactical fold, disappearing from the Cygnus X1 system just as the leading edge of the anti-memory wave would have touched its hull. They reappeared in the Sol system with a nauseating lurch, the crystalline sphere of sanctified Earth once again filling the viewport. But the silence here was different now. It was a silence filled with anticipation. Ilara's long-range sensors immediately locked onto the sleeper's vessel. It was a tiny, unassuming cryopod, its hull scorched and pitted, its technology archaic. It looked like a coffin, adrift in a graveyard of a system. As the Absolution moved to intercept, a new variable entered the equation. The sanctified sphere itself began to change. The flawless, crystalline surface, a perfect monument to mandate power, began to crack, not from an external force, but from within. Deep, hairline fractures spread across its glittering face, and from these cracks, a faint, golden light began to bleed out, a light that felt warm, organic, and impossibly ancient. "What's happening?" Ilara breathed. The sanctification was never perfect. The warden explained. It was a shell, a prison. Beneath it, the heart of our world was not extinguished. It was merely suppressed. The sleeper's awakening, combined with the resonance of our fleet's return, has created a paradox the prison cannot contain. The truth is breaking free. The cryopod was brought aboard the Absolution and rushed to a sterile, white medical bay. It was a simple, elegant piece of pre-mandate technology, its surface cold to the touch. As Ilara and the warden watched, the pod's seal hissed open, releasing a cloud of vapor that had been contained for 200 years. Inside, A young woman lay suspended in a translucent gel, her features serene, her skin pale, her dark hair fanned out like a halo. She looked no older than 20. Wires and sensors were connected to her temples and her chest, all leading to a single, softly pulsing light at the head of the pod. Alara felt an overwhelming sense of reverence. This was it. The last untainted human. The living library she had spent her life seeking. Is she alive? Alara whispered. Her biological functions are stable. Her consciousness is dormant. The warden replied, she is the archive. Her DNA contains the full, unedited story of our species, but to use it as an anchor, we need to make the story legible. We need to wake her up. The warden extended a slender, metallic finger, its tip glowing with a soft, blue light. It touched a control panel on the side of the cryopod. With a low hum, the gel began to drain away, and the life support systems initiated a reanimation sequence. As the sleeper's chest took its first, shuddering breath in 2 centuries, a new alarm shrieked through the bridge. A massive gravitational distortion was forming at the edge of the Sol system. A fleet had arrived. But it was not the mandate. The ships that emerged from warp space were unlike anything Alara had ever seen. They were not the geometric heresy of the Echo Fleet, nor the pristine elegance of the mandate. These vessels were organic, almost biological, their hulls a swirling fusion of crystalline structures and living, pulsating flesh. They looked like creatures born from the depths of a gas giant's ocean, vast, sentient leviathans of the void, their forms beautiful and monstrous in equal measure. They hailed the absolution, their message not spoken in words, but conveyed through a wave of empathic and telepathic images. The message was one of immense age, cosmic scale, and profound disappointment. They were the curators, a species so ancient they viewed the rise and fall of galactic empires as a passing season. They were not warriors, but cosmic gardeners, and their garden was the delicate balance of cosmic law and causality. And the Echo Fleet, with its reality-bending weapons and its reckless disregard for the established narrative of the universe, was a weed that needed to be pulled. You have broken the seals of time. The curator's message washed over them, a feeling of immense parental sadness. You wield concepts you do not comprehend. The anti-memory wave you have provoked from the lesser species is a stain upon the fabric of what is a wound we must now cauterize. Your existence is a paradox that threatens the integrity of the great story. You will cease. It is not a request. The Leviathan ships began to position themselves, not aiming weapons, but resonating with the very structure of space around the Echo Fleet. The laws of physics began to grow pliable, inconsistent. The absolution's inertial dampeners flickered as the definition of inertia itself became a variable. In the medical bay, the sleeper's eyes snapped open. They were not the eyes of a confused, newly awakened woman. They were ancient, filled with a light that seemed to contain the fire of 1,000,000,000 suns. She sat up, the sensors and wires falling away from her as if they were ash. She looked directly at the medical bay's camera, her gaze piercing through the ship to find Alara on the bridge. Her voice, when it came, was not a single voice, but a chorus, a perfect harmony of 1,000,000 voices speaking as one, and it filled every corner of the ship. "The curators are here," the sleeper said, her tone not one of fear, but of profound, weary recognition. "They have come to close the book. They will not allow our story to be told. She stood, her simple cryosuit shimmering as if it were woven from starlight. They are wrong. The story is not over. It is just beginning. As she spoke, the golden light bleeding from the cracks in sanctified earth intensified. A brilliant, focused beam lancing across space to strike the hull of the Absolution. The ship did not buckle or break. It absorbed the light. Its dark, scarred hull beginning to glow from within. Its ancient systems overloading not with power, but with purpose. The ghosts of the Echo fleet roared in unison, a wave of pure, defiant life, and, for the first time, Alara felt something she had never encountered from the Gestalt consciousness hope. Fierce and blinding. The sleeper, the living library, was awake, and the final, unredacted chapter of humanity was about to be written in fire across the stars. The voice of the sleeper, no, not the sleeper, for she was profoundly awake, was not a sound that traveled through the air. It was a resonance that bloomed in the mind. A perfect chord struck on the strings of consciousness itself. Her name, she imparted to them, was Anya, a name that was also a title, meaning first witness. The chorus of voices that made up her being spoke as one, addressing the silent, judging leviathans that were the curators, you who garden the stars. Anya's thoughts washed over the bridge of the Absolution, calm and clear. You prune the branches you believe are overgrown. You see our story as a discordant note in the great song. You are mistaken. You have only heard the first violent measure. Allow us to play the coda. The pressure from the curator fleet intensified. The very laws of physics aboard the Absolution flickered, gravity wavering, light bending at unnatural angles. The message was clear. There would be no negotiation. Paradoxes were to be corrected, not debated. But Anya was not debating. She was orchestrating. She turned her ancient eyes, which now glowed with a soft, internal light, towards the viewport showing sanctified Earth. The golden light erupting from the planet's crystalline shell coalesced into a single, brilliant beam that pierced the void and struck the Absolution. The ship groaned, not in protest, but in transformation. The dark, brutalist metal of its hull became translucent, revealing the swirling nebulae of consciousness that were its crew. The Echo fleet was no longer just a collection of arguments. It was becoming a single, unified thesis. "What is she doing?" Alara asked, her hands gripping her console to steady herself against the warping reality. "She is not a weapon." The warden's voice resonated, a new note of awe in its synthesized chorus. "She is a key, not to a prison, but to a library far grander than you ever imagined. She is unlocking the final archive." As if in response, the crystalline sphere of sanctified Earth shattered. It did not explode. It dissolved, peeling away like the petals of a blossoming flower, the mile-thick lattice of its prison sublimating into a shimmering cloud of harmless dust. And what lay beneath was not a world of rock and ocean, of continents and clouds. It was a sphere of pure light, a miniature sun of information, a roiling, living ocean of memory. It was the world mind of Earth, the Gestalt consciousness of every soul that had ever lived and died on its surface, preserved in a quantum state, a final, desperate act of a dying civilization. This was the source of the Echo, the true heart of Project Enoch. The curators paused their assault, their immense, biological forms rendered motionless by the sheer, unanticipated glory of what they were witnessing. They had expected to find a dead world, a historical footnote. They had found a living God. You see a paradox. Anya's voice boomed, now amplified by the world mind, a symphony of 1,000,000,000,000 voices speaking in unison. We see the engine of creation, a story without conflict, without error, without the potential for tragedy, is not a story. It is a sterile equation. You cultivate a garden of perfect, unchanging flowers. We offer you a forest wild, chaotic, ever-growing, and alive. From the world mind, a torrent of information flowed, not as a weapon, but as an offering. It streamed into the consciousness of the curators, a story told in the language of pure experience. They felt the terror and the triumph of the first creature to crawl from the sea. They felt the heartbreak of a composer writing their final, unfinished symphony. They felt the irrational hope of an astronomer looking for new worlds. They experienced the entirety of humanity's messy, contradictory, beautiful, and terrible narrative in a single, condensed moment. And then, the anti-memory wave arrived. The leading edge of the Silentium's final protocol breached the outer edge of the Sol system, a tide of perfect, hungry nothingness. The curators began to move, preparing to erect a causal barrier, to cauterize this wound in reality, an act that would undoubtedly annihilate the entire system in the process. "Stop!" Anya commanded, and for the first time, her voice was not a request or an argument, but an order with the weight of a universe behind it. She turned her attention from the curators to the approaching wave of erasure. The world mind pulsed, its brilliant light dimming for a moment as it drew in a colossal breath, and then it did the one thing that was truly impossible. It did not block the wave. It did not deflect it. It welcomed it. Like a lung inhaling air, the living archive of Earth began to draw in the anti-memory wave, the wave of absolute erasure. The mandate's ultimate expression of control was consumed by the ultimate expression of memory. The silence was not defeated, it was absorbed. The act of being forgotten was on itself, remembered, on the bridge of the absolution. Alara watched in stunned silence as the terrible void was turned into a new chapter in the library. The scar was not healed. It was woven into the tapestry, a dark thread that made the brighter colors shine with greater intensity. The world mind shuddered, its light flickering. But when the last of the wave was gone, it shone brighter than before, stronger, more complete. It had faced the argument of nothingness and had proven that even nothing could be made a part of something. In the face of this act, the curators were silent. Their logic was absolute, but the event they had just witnessed was a miracle that transcended logic. It was an act of cosmic defiance so profound it had not just broken the rules, it had rewritten the rulebook. The great story requires novelty. Their empathic message finally came, no longer a judgment, but a quiet, stunned admission. Your existence is a dangerous, chaotic variable, but we see now that it is necessary. The garden must have its wild places. We will not prune this branch. We will observe. With a slow, majestic grace that defied their monstrous forms, the curator fleet turned and vanished into the void, leaving behind a silence filled not with judgment, but with possibility. The war was not over, but the central conflict of the universe had been redefined. The stellar mandate, its greatest weapon, turned into a footnote, and its foundational lies shattered by the reawakening of Earth, would not be defeated by a fleet. It would crumble from within. Its doctrine of a single, unified truth rendered obsolete by the revelation of a living, breathing history. Alara stood on the bridge, which had returned to its solid, scarred state, the light from the world mine bathing her in a warm, golden glow. Anya stood beside her now, no longer a remote voice, but a physical presence, her eyes holding the wisdom of ages. The warden was a silent sentinel at their side. "What happens now?" Alara asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Now, the library is open," Anya said, her chorus of voices softening to a single, gentle tone. "The galaxy has been starved of its own stories for too long. We, the Echo Fleet, will no longer be an instrument of rectification. We will be librarians. We will travel the stars not to unmake the mandate's lies, but to offer the galaxy its own truths, to help them remember what they were forced to forget." Anya looked at Alara, a faint, knowing smile on her lips. "Every library needs a head librarian, a keeper of the first draft, a witness to the beginning of the new story." Alara looked from the living archive before her to the reborn Earth shining in the viewport. Her long, lonely quest was over. She had been chasing a ghost and had found the soul of her species. She had sought a lost book and had been handed the pen to write the next chapter. Her personal rage had been subsumed into a galactic purpose. "I accept," she said, her voice clear and steady, the voice of a woman who had found her place not in the silent, dusty halls of a forgotten archive, but on the bridge of a living idea, at the dawn of a new age of memory. The silence where Earth used to be was finally, truly broken, replaced by the quiet, hopeful hum of a trillion stories waiting to be told.